We are recording officially.
Awesome. Okay, and so the first thing we should do, hi everybody, and welcome to the first ever query community call. And before we get started, we should totally paste a link to our HackMD in the notes, or in the chat.
I did, so for anybody who, I don't know if is it viewable for anybody who comes late? I'll just post it again.
That'd be great. I totally showed up late. So yeah, I think it'd be great if we just started with some quick intros from everybody on the call, just so everyone knows who each other is. I think we can keep this pretty short, just your name, where you're calling from, and your favorite color, because why not? And so I'll call out the names as I see them. And so I'll go first, and then after me I see Rico, and then I see Rob Brackett. So my name is Brendan O'Brien. I work at Query. I'm calling from Brooklyn, and my favorite color is sandalwood.
I'm Rico. I'm part of the Query team. I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York as well. And I'm going to go with gray, like a dark gray. Very useful color.
Hey everyone, I'm Kevin. I'm from San Diego. I'm the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, EDGI's community coordinator, and my favorite color is blue-green.
I'm Rob. I'm in San Francisco. I live in San Francisco. I'm in San Francisco, and so is Kevin. He's displaced. And I also do stuff with Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. And my favorite color is blue, boring blue.
Awesome. And next I see Ramfox, DeLong, and Kelsey.
Hey guys, my name is Casey. I work at Query. I am calling in from Brooklyn, right behind Rico. I don't know if you can see him there. And my favorite color is green.
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm DeLong, Dustin. I'm also in Brooklyn. I work on Query as an engineer, and I was also going to say green, so I'm just going to go with that again.
Oh man, I was muted the whole time. Unmuted that whole time. Anyway, hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm north of Seattle, and my favorite color is the brightest possible red.
Phenomenal. Okay, and next I see Astrid and Jonathan.
Hi, I'm Astro, and I'm calling from the Bronx, and my favorite color is purple.
Hey, I'm Jonathan. I'm also calling from the Bronx, Hunter College currently, and my favorite color is also green.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's really appreciated. We've got a lot of green. I'll come up with a more original question for introductions at some point. We were a little seat of the pants today. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. I think we'll try and keep this sort of as brief as we can, but Query has sort of hit a really fun point in the development of our project. We've been working for about, the total time the project has existed is around 3 years. We've been working on it really hard for about a year and a half as a team. We sort of started to define this goal. A really fun threshold got crossed. It's not even in an official release yet, but we thought, why wait for an official release? But we sort of, as this feature called updates landed in Query most recently in the backend, we think that we've actually come to the point where the sort of software that we've built is now kind of feature complete. We have a first offering that's ready, and there's a major, which is great and fun, but it's a command line tool, and it's very sophisticated, but it's a little bit tough to use. And so we sort of set some new goals for ourselves as sort of the next phase of the project. And this is where we think that it's really important to sort of start learning how the things that got us to this point are different from the things that'll take us to the next point in terms of being a good open source project that has a vibrant community around it and a supportive sort of network of people who are helping to build this sort of data bazaar goal we've been chasing. And so long-term, we're really hoping to sort of make data a more open and accessible thing that more people are able to contribute to and collaborate on, trying to turn data into a bit of a two-way conversation. And so to get there, now that we have sort of this baseline foundation of tools to work with, we have this new set of challenges. And the new challenges are basically, how do we make everything that we've just built usable and sort of approachable? And how do we make sure that while we're using and building that next set of things, that we're doing so in a way that is part of a growing open community? And that really means a lot of sort of like shifts for us as a project, where we're doing everything we can over the next couple of months to turn and sort of face more outward and sort of think more carefully about how can we loop lots of people in. So we've been like for people with some close collaborators in our room for a long time. And I think now is the time to sort of really sort of turn our attention to how can we sort of do more open collaboration. And so with that in mind, we sort of are kicking off these new calls. We're going to try and host them at the same time every week. We're going to alternate the purpose. So this week is sort of much more oriented toward actually using query to do interesting stuff. And then the next week that it will alternate with is more around building query, sort of like doing the development side of things. And so both calls aren't mutually exclusive. You're more than welcome to join either. And then once a quarter, we will do a sort of much more high-level goal setting and road mapping call, where it's much more like, cool, here's what we've accomplished over the last 3 months. Here's what we intend to accomplish over the next 3 months. And here's what we want to accomplish over the course of the year. And so we'll do that. That will take place at the exact same time, and we'll place just whatever time it lands on. It'll be the big coordinating call. This is supposed to complement a lot of our asynchronous work. You shouldn't need to join these calls to sort of participate in the project. It's intended, we mainly use our Discord chat as like a place to do like quick, like flyby, like, hey, how does this work? And we have a link to the Discord in this new community repo that we kicked off today. But yeah, so that's sort of like the high level here. So today we're hoping to sort of just talk about query use cases really quick and sort of get everybody introduced to something I quickly slammed together called the dataset project template. I think I'm jumping around a bit. I need to look at the calendar really quick here. Yes, and so yeah, that's the call. That's the call purpose. The purpose here is like really to drill in on like, we're trying to define everything to be sort of use case driven. So like, hopefully what we can sort of do with this call is everyone has an actual data project they're working on, some sort of actual thing they're trying to accomplish. And our goal is to sort of make sure that you can accomplish that thing on this call. And so the purpose of this time is like, hey, this is what I tried to pull off. This is how this didn't work, or this did work, or this is going really great. So like a place to share with other people something you've actually sort of finished when you get to that wonderful point of building something cool. But also as a place to sort of just like debug and work through using query, not necessarily through the like build process. And so this is going to be very all hands and very sort of like, but very much oriented towards like, how does query work today, and how can we make it work for whatever you're trying to do today? And so this purpose of this call is to be able to talk through some of that stuff. Okay, so that's a lot of sort of like, basically that gets us through the sort of purpose of this and the other calls. And yeah, I guess this is going to be, I realize that after looking at this schedule now that like, this is basically just Brendan talking directly. So I'm going to take a pause right here and say, how does that read with everybody right now? We generically, like a couple of points that might be worth thinking about. We just like picked Mondays at 2 as like a time. And yeah, just the format settle with everybody. Can people make this time? Is it super difficult? Just thoughts and input on this sort of like general format.
I think the time is good.
Yeah, and even if it's you don't intend to join the call on a weekly basis, another reason we chose this time is that it's relatively convenient for West Coast folks and manageable for anybody in Europe and other like 6 time zones ahead. So we thought that this, another reasons why it's in Monday afternoon.
Will the meeting notes be available if you happen to not make a call?
Absolutely. And so we're going to do a lot of this, I should point out, is like this, a lot of this process is very much thanks to a lot of the work that we do at EDGI. And so we're kind of like, so the EDGI is Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, of which a bunch of us are members, and I think have a really good process here. And so the calls are recorded and posted to YouTube on a playlist, and the actual notes will be made publicly available as well. We don't know how we're going to do the public available notes. We're definitely going to record the notes in this HackMD, and then, but there's like an ongoing thing here about how do we collect them and keep them sort of publicly available. But absolutely, they will be made available and documented. I think the one thing to like that I would point everyone to is at EDGI, we really found that the calendar is like super helpful for understanding when meetings are, and we're going to use that as our canonical source of truth. So if it's in the calendar, it's like every meeting should have the notes link and the actual Zoom call link. We didn't get the notes link into this calendar, but we're getting there. So if you link to that calendar, you will know when the call is, what the call is, and how to get to it. And we'll work really hard to make sure that's up to date as we go. Sound good?
Awesome.
Cool. So with that, I just basically today, if I know we basically, to kick things off, we don't have any like project. We have some projects in the background that I can sort of surface as good examples, but I was hoping to sort of situate how I think it would be easier to sort of go through this process of like coordinating on each other's work and to try and like check in on how some of these data sets might work. Mainly because it's really like Query is a generic data set tool, and it's really hard to think about a generic tool without like some context, without like a real like actual use case. And so with that in mind, I think it's important to sort of like outline how we sort of think about defining a data project, so that when we're talking, we have some common terms and themes to work with, and to sort of define the place where we think it'll be really helpful to sort of just like share what you're working on and create sort of a running issue of how, while you're working on that, like, so that we can sort of complement what you're doing from a number of levels. With that, I'm going to paste a link into the chat to our project template, which is just a markdown file, but does everybody, maybe I can just share a screen and go through this really quick together. If that makes the most sense. 1 second. Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, I'm being asked to give allowance to Zoom for some reason. Okay, leave me alone. Share. Cool. There we go. So, does everyone see this dataset project template screen? Okay, I'm seeing some nods, yes. Okay, great. So yeah, what we're really hoping to do with this is just like basically define a sort of workflow for defining a process for defining a process, which is just basically, here's how we think about going about building a data set in a way that can hopefully help us collaborate more openly on a lot of this stuff. And so for this, we're basically just like are running through the high level of like what we think it means to sort of end up at a data set and situate how query might be useful in a broader context. Because I think it's important to sort of like back up and realize that like what we're really trying to do at a high level here is help each other gain knowledge about the things that we care about. And so as you're working through this, the hope is that you will define a project that is interesting to you and that we will help you learn whatever it is you want to learn as you go. And our job is not to sort of like just throw random work around and instead be like, cool, what are you trying to do and how can we help you get there? It's kind of the definition of open collaboration. And so with that in mind, this document hopefully helps us sort of define what will eventually be a way to sort of help us understand how to make query a better tool. So the hope is that you're actually trying this out, sort of doing a project to advance your own learning. And while you're doing that, if you find the right moments to use query, or you figure out that query might be a useful sort of part of your process, we can both understand what you're trying to do and how we can help you do it. And so here, this is sort of just like very, very high level, but I think it's really important to sort of situate this in a broader context. But like the first thing you should do when you're sort of starting out with a data project is not think about it as a data project at all. It's just like define something you want to know. And so like we're using, and through all of this, we're sort of using a great example that's already happening over at Edgy, which is we're trying to build a sort of, we want to understand how the EPA.gov sitemap changes over time. And we also have like, at the same time, we also really want to define our motivation for that. Like, why do we want to know that information in the first place? And the sort of reason for that in that example is that we are checking to see how often pages are linked to is an indicator of kind of what content is being emphasized. But it's also important to know that there are lots of other indicators. There are lots of, this isn't like some like canonical source of truth, but how many times a page is linked to is really valuable information. And then what we really want to understand is, because that's quantitative information, tracking how many, if you think of a single web page on EPA.gov, if the number of things that link to that inside of EPA.gov go up, then we know that that page is being emphasized, is being linked to more. And if that number goes down, then we know that that page is either being de-emphasized or is being, other content is being preferred over it. Does that make sense? And sort of like stop and walk through, take a quick pulse. Does everybody sort of follow with what we're doing here, defining a project and like going through the process? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. All right, cool. But yeah, the next thing I think is, and this is where like, ideally, if you sort of like want to collaborate with us on this stuff, you can literally just open an issue and just, on this community repo at query-io/community. This is the new sort of spot we're hoping to collaborate around, and we have a new label for dataset projects, where just define what you're trying to learn, and then start listing out some of the sources that you have looked through, or for. And this, at this point, like, ideally others can sort of chime in and help find sources. Like, there are lots of folks who have researched lots of different areas, and maybe you can just chuck lists onto that GitHub issue of like, hey, have you looked here? Have you looked there? And these are just sources of information. And this isn't necessarily structured data. This might be just like PDFs or white papers or library resources or any sort of knowledge acquisition tool. Because I think it's quite common that you're like, hey, I really want to understand like something for some reason, and you come to realize that, oh, someone's actually already done that work, and a lot of the work is just to like be pointed to that research. And I think that's really worth just like working through. And so once you sort of work through all of those, you may actually ideally arrive to the point where you decide that you need to build a data set to sort of learn the thing that you want to understand. And if you sort of hit that magic moment, then we can sort of like move into like the action phase of things, which is like building and analyzing a data set. So in our case, using this sort of sitemap generation tool, I immediately was like, Google should probably publish these sitemaps. I should be able to like get these sitemaps from Google. And as it turns out, I couldn't find anything. But if somebody else does, then I can sort of like save myself a lot of work and not have to sort of continue building this data set. I could just go to that other thing. In this case, it didn't. So we've decided that we're going to use this project that we've been working on called Walk to generate sitemaps. And we have a plan for that. We're going to generate that sitemap at some regular interval. And then we're going to do analysis on those sort of like versions of sitemaps. So then we can start to see how many times a link has changed. Yeah, does everyone follow that so far? Cool. Awesome. So once you've sort of done that, the next bit is to like actually, once you've built the data set, is to actually do some analysis on it. And this is where we think it's really sort of the number of analysis tools you can use are all over the place. And this is where I think like already some like exciting things jump out around integrations and like taking this data and moving it into different places. It's really interesting. But for our case, I'm just going to keep this like really concise and say that like we've defined like 3 pieces of analysis that we want to sort of get out of this. And importantly, we've sort of decided that we're going to be making 2 data sets. One is the actual sitemap, and then another one is a derivative thing that just does analysis of that raw data. So we're going to have one data set that just generates the sort of raw information, and then we're going to do another data set that sort of performs some analysis on it. We're going to publish both so that people can take the raw data themselves and do whatever they want with it. But then this analysis data set is going to look like this. It's going to just count some like basic statistics that we think is worth sort of highlighting as a sort of top level view of what's changed between 2 snapshots of a sitemap. And so we just want to see how many times the number of added links to, so links from one page to another, and the highest number of pages that have been removed, links dropping to 0. And then finally, links that have dropped to 0, because when nothing has counted it, this is a theory that I have that like, if nothing links to something, is that a really significant event? How often does that happen? Or is that not how these sites behave? So we actually don't know the answer to that, and that's ideally the fun part. But assuming we get all the way through that, the last bits are just to sort of, once you've actually found some insight, is to create a visualization and try to sort of push that visualization or that insight out to others. And from here, so we're going to sort of like take those results, turn them into a visualization template, and publish that with query. And once other people have it, ideally they can sort of get at it very easily. And so like, again, we want to see if can we tweak links to that? Can we get to it really easily from the regular internet? Can we move that data around very easily? So there's lots of questions here for how query could be helpful. And then the last one is finally, if you've done all of that one time, it's like, great, you finished that analysis once. And now can we automate that so that you don't have to do that work so consistently, and instead you can just sort of check in and have query sort of help you along the way. And so this automation step is the last thing that we've landed. It's also the newest thing that's worked out, but there are lots of ways to do that and lots of approaches to it. But in our eyes, once you've landed at the automation step, you've built a data set that is now continually putting new insights into the world. And for us, that's the sort of like great beginning for what we think is an effective and thriving data bazaar. Anyways, that's a lot. Does anyone have any questions on that? Wow, I explained it perfectly. That's great. Okay, so ideally that's like a fairly straightforward thing. So the next, maybe it's straightforward, maybe it's not, and we need to go through some examples. But I use this example of building edgy web site maps, which is just top of mind because it's something that we're actually doing. And so I was wondering if others have any other sort of like top of mind like data sets they want to build. Ideally, this is sort of like point to some like very different use cases and examples because they should get all over the map as you start thinking about different kinds of data. Anybody have any other data sets that they're like that they wish existed, that they're trying to build, stuff they want to understand better, just like any part of the sort of data ecosystem lifecycle?
I kind of had something in mind. So I wanted to eventually build a data set of clickbait videos or like titles for YouTube. And then I wanted to be able to have something predictive from the thumbnail and the title if it's clickbait or not.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's super fun. Do you have, yeah, go ahead.
No, like my plan was to create a Chrome extension that would help people to just judge it. And then I'd store that somewhere and then like from their input and then kind of run analysis off of that.
That's amazing. Oh, Jonathan, that'll be super fun. I mean, I think there's like, yeah, you could do a Chrome extension. You could also just like start assembling places that are probably clickbait, like just scrape a whole bunch of BuzzFeed headlines and be like, and start with that. The image is really interesting. Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, so like, I think we could define a number of sources of potentially clickbaity places and sort of like regularly build up sort of some like input sources of data from that. Yeah, would you have any interest in opening an issue on this community thing? We can start working through that.
Okay, cool. My laptop died. That's why I'm on my phone right now.
It's all good. It's all good.
A little later, I'll open up the issue.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Rico?
So one project I was thinking about working on is when I was applying to colleges, I went to like US News and World Report and I took down the rankings, but also like the tuition and SAT ranges and all these other facts that were new columns for all of the schools. And then I kind of added in figures from other research into that. So even if it's not a ranking, but just some catalog of like American colleges and all the data that comes from the US News and World Report, comes from Princeton Review or whatever. I think that would have been very useful to me if I were 17 and applying to schools.
That's super fun. And since you work at Korea, I think I can twist your arm into filing an issue around that. Or are you willing to file an issue around that?
Heck yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I know we've defined a couple of other ones at Edgy. Are there any like major ones that jump out?
I guess I'll pop in for edgy things. So the one that's well, two that are top of mind for me right now, which you'll both be familiar with, Brendan, but other people might not. One is looking at air quality and other monitoring data from both like federal level, but also like state level agencies, and being able to sort of like archive and monitor that over time and put it all together in one place instead of mostly there in like web pages that you gotta like click at this monitor and then look at this monitor, which is not helpful to anybody. And then another one is we've sort of been looking at environmental impact statements, and there's a lot of questions around like whether environmental impact statements are good things or actually bad things. And so just being able to compile sort of all the metadata about them, who filed them, when they're being filed, like their relationship in time to the project they're related to, stuff like that, would be super interesting, even outside of just looking at the statements themselves. But also like inside those statements, how could you pull out and start to catalog the things that are like structured tabular data, like they all list like a giant, like mind-bogglingly long list of like species that might be affected in some way. And so it would be like interesting to look at that kind of stuff. Those are the two that are like top of mind for me.
That's amazing. Thank you. Kelsey, do you have one?
Yeah, someone posed the question to me of like, do we have a way of tracking just what websites change and how often, for the purposes of then applying machine learning to say, well, what websites should we watch more closely?
Oh, that's really interesting. Now, do you have any like precision around what websites, like lots of websites? We're mainly talking about government websites, or is there like a domain specificity?
I mean, I was asked this in the context of explaining what Edgy does, and I was like, well, we watch websites. And they're like, do you do it like this? Like, no, but that's cool.
Yeah, that's so much more interesting. And like, I think there's something really interesting there about like frequency of change, and like, could you, like, I think like a news site versus a social media site would have like a pattern of change that is just very different. And like, how much do you see certain types of, like, I think about like The Guardian now has this like live update section where they're basically just live tweeting, but it's like inside of their own, and like that frequency of change, like obviously that's not trackable at the URL level, but there's like a really, there's got to be some association between types of content and like value of like edge of content and frequency of change. That's be really fun to sort of dig in on.
But also you could take that to in the direction of more like, you know, the decentralized web concept where you want your own server so that nobody rearranges the furniture on you. Kind of tracking updates and what's like which apps and which interfaces update most frequently, which ones are classified as major versus minor updates versus like how people react to them would be a really interesting kind of social study.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, I think you could take that entire study and apply it to GitHub. And major minor release, as soon as you said major minor release, it's like it's like I don't know, the JavaScript community, like major release all the time, right? Like version 30 is not uncommon, and then in the Go world, like version 2 is like against the rules. But yeah, that'd be really interesting. Okay, anyone else? I have one on deck, but I'd love to hear others.
So I have an idea. I'm still trying to think it through. But I remember going abroad to Turkey, and it was the first election of Obama. And I remember feeling really embarrassed at not understanding what the candidates were in favor of, and just really a comprehensive understanding of the elections as a U.S. citizen. Meanwhile, everyone else while I was abroad had a great understanding. And so now, since the 2020 elections are coming up, I want to web scrape a couple things. First, I want to web scrape just like voting records for candidates so that we can have a better understanding of what has been their voting history. Also, scraping Twitter data so I can provide some sentiment analysis in regards to social issues so we have a better understanding of where they actually stand, especially maybe trying to figure out how to go back into Twitter data, into the Twitter history, so we can see how perhaps their language or their preferences have changed over time to maybe fit certain platforms that they're presenting. And so, yeah, that's just kind of what I'm playing with right now, just creating a data set of candidates' voting history and their Twitter sentiment analysis.
That's fantastic. Oh, that'd be super fun. I think there's like no end to the amount of work you could do there to understand where politicians are. But I think there's a lot of like high level, like you said, like Twitter is an amazing one, and just like a basic enumeration of who the candidates are, and like, can you just go to their websites and pull their platforms and like put them into one data set? That'd be an incredible starting point. Very cool. Very, very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we should definitely keep working on a lot of these, because I think there's, from a lot of these, you're hearing mainly sort of web scraping, which has been really interesting. Like we're seeing a lot of content around that, but then also sort of like some interesting challenges that'll show up, like archiving Twitter is like a notoriously, like you have to be logged in, and or you need certain API tokens, and you have to do some certain sort of like tricks. And like if you're just basing it on feeds, like what individual users see is very different. And so there's lots of fun stuff there. Dustin has just finished shipping some stuff that makes our Starlark repo work more like beautiful soup. So we finally have a better HTML parser. So some of this stuff like directly ties into like how we'll sort of develop query to make it a little easier to do some of these primary things. Yeah, I'm personally, I'm really interested in like why in ride sharing, I sort of have gotten the data set that I want to throw on the table. It's like New York City has a really good open data set of for-hire vehicles, which just means vehicles that are doing Lyft, Uber, Juno, or any of the other sort of ride hailing apps. But I'm also like really interested in like understanding, there's also this massive data set of taxi fares in New York and like the actual cost of taxi fares. And with Uber recently's IPO like going very poorly, and Lyft just announcing that they spent twice as much money to double their users, or they doubled their users, but they lost a whole bunch more cash. There's this question about the sustainability of ride sharing. And so I think it'd be really interesting to sort of drill in on what would the price of an Uber, what should it be if you sort of like put some of the costs of like paying people a certain wage and the operational costs of a large company operating on top of that. What would that look like, and what would that price be? So yeah, that's the one that I'm going to like be sort of trying to drill down on for the next little while. For the reason I bring that up is because like what's exciting is a lot of these sort of data sets sort of have a nice scale to them. None of them are reaching the like many gigabyte range. And so it'll be interesting to sort of see how that works over time. But cool. So yeah, I think the hope is to sort of like, if everyone's interested, you pick this project off the wall, you start trying to work on it. The thing that we've made is very, very new and needs, and the ask that we have to put forward to the community is to sort of take a leap of faith and pioneer using a new tool to sort of accomplish your goal, and to sort of help for us to be able to help each other understand how this thing works right now, what its idiosyncrasies are, and really document where it could be improved. And I think for us, a lot of that surrounds documentation and just like, how do I do this, and sharing techniques and making sure that that's available and clear and accessible, so that others can sort of, people who are increasingly unfamiliar with the project are able to sort of use it to form data sets that work. And like the reason for us doing this in the first place is because if we're using query to do these things, we naturally are forming this sort of like distributed thing that really matches a lot of values that we've been developing in other parts. Like we do a lot of work at Data Together to sort of understand what would it mean to build a sort of data ecosystem that is a little more equitable, a little more open, a little more evenly distributed. So if we're doing our jobs right, that should show up. But it's very important that we make it easy enough to do that it's not so painful that the alternative is just like, let's just use Google Sheets, which you should totally use Google Sheets a bunch. It's totally fine, or some other spreadsheet system. It's definitely, yeah. But what I'm hoping we can do is sort of get into a position where we're aware of each other's work and we're able to sort of help each other's work come to fruition. So yeah, with that, I think, where are we at on the agenda? Yeah, so we've gone through the examples, and I guess, yeah, basically I wanted to sort of point everyone to a couple of resources that everyone's aware of. They're linked in the bottom of that HackMD doc. But hopefully that documentation is a good starting point. But one of our biggest asks, and so like while we're working on this project, is just to like, please tell us where it's broken, tell us where it hurts. Like ideally one of our biggest goals for this project for the next, like from now until the end of time, is just to be more open and conversational on GitHub and really be responsive to some of the questions that are showing up, and start to organize and collate those into what should eventually end up on a website in a really clear way that sort of like naturally feels like it's answering the questions as they're coming to you. It's a long goal, it's a long road, but we're hoping with your help we can sort of understand where query is the most broken and how we can fix it the fastest. As a great example, Rob filed an issue this morning about how all the text on our command line currently prints in white. So if you have a light colored terminal, your text is going to be white, and we should get that fixed soon. But yeah, stuff like that is like so incredibly helpful, because there's just so many varieties and things that we need to get right as we have this like big new thing. But yeah, with that, thank you so much everyone for joining this call. Does anyone have any, like, I guess the thing we want to sort of leave as a point of discussion is just like, how can we help? How'd you find this project? Is there anything that we sort of haven't answered here that should be answered? Are there questions that just like don't fit any of the agenda and above that we could sort of speak to.
You have example projects and tutorials that are live and current right now that we could like poke through as a like self-taught 101?
That would have been smart. We have stuff that's close, but not totally like to the bleeding edge current. The place that we've been doing that is a GitHub organization called Query Recipes. We've been keeping it separately because we want to be able to sort of like just keep adding projects to there. And as I'm just adding a link to the chat. There are a number of projects there that actually do walk you through how to make it work. I will take a pass at those and make sure that they do work. I can quickly check because I know for a fact, Jonathan Astro, we showed you one of those when we demoed at the Knowledge House. But where is it's the one on the world population data set should be. Oh, Rico, the MLB home run one is up to date, is it?
That's what I'm saying. So Kelsey and Astro and Jonathan, I'm also going to paste this link to a blog that Casey and I worked on together, which is a web scraping query data set where I took some Major League home run rankings and turned them into a query data set that I wanted to look as I wanted it to. And so the blog post is very like, I just banged that out with some text that should help support you as you look at it. But that should be a good, at least starter for understanding like how the script ties in with the data set and how, gives you an inspiration for how to tie those two together. That's it.
I totally spaced on that blog post that Rico put a ton of effort into. And so I'm so sorry, Rico. I think that's a great starting point because it is up to date. We will be changing up the HTML parser. Well, you can use that one, or you can use the new beautiful soup one once it lands, but we're going to publish 0.8.0 soon. That has a whole bunch of this stuff in it. Does that answer your question, Kelsey? Cool. Kevin? I think you're muted.
If I have, like tech issue, like I tried to install the front end app and I got error messages. Should I ask in Discord first? Should I open an issue? Like what's the workflow I should do when I'm asking for help? Because there's so many different areas now with the community and
Totally. And one of the things that the first issue we opened on the community repo was like set up our GitHub templates to like point everybody in the right direction when you try to file an issue. But I think if you know that if you don't know where to file it, Discord. But if it's something that doesn't work, it's an issue that needs to be filed. Generally, I think we start on front end unless you're using the command line. Because if it's a problem that's showing up on the front end, we have to start the debugging process at the front end and work backwards. It might be a back end issue, but we'd rather sort of like understand the problem from the use case perspective. Like, okay, cool, I dragged the query app into my desktop and then I clicked this and then I saw this error message. Well, that we should sort of start from there and work backwards.
Yeah. So what would I use the Discord channel for? Mostly?
So I was going to say one of the ways we've used Discord, actually Casey and Dustin can chime in and augment this answer, but I think it's like press 0 for reception or for a representative. So like that's a little more live, at least during working hours, where if you've got like, I need help immediately, that's a pretty good play. That's how we've helped a lot of people through Discord anyway.
Cool.
Kelsey?
One more quick question is, do you normally assume people are using the web interface? I thought it was mostly a CLI tool right now.
Really good question. The downloads of the front end are about 10-to-1 of the CLI. And so that's, for us, they're really sort of like two very disparate communities that we serve. And so we really think about them separately. We should think about like working them together. As we build query, it starts with the CLI and then moves towards the front end. And so that's
would you prefer more users on one versus the other? I'm looking at, I do that meetup for the decentralized web and I'm looking for tutorials. So I'm transparently asking all these questions to guide that.
This is amazing. Yeah, I think the front end is where we want to end. And so if you can do it with the front end, if you try it with the front end and it works, please then use the front end for sure. Because what we really want to do is we want to end up where people don't need to program at all, right? Like they just can they have like a interface that they can understand. And so that's why we've been developing the interface with the CLI the whole time. We sort of always said, cool, we have to be able to do this. That's in some way through a sort of user interface that is point and click. That we are really, really, then as we've come along, we've come to realize there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And Casey is really the she's holding it down pretty single-handedly on the front end these days. and so we do owe her a lot more planning and making sure that we sort of have everything in place. But if you can do it with the front end right now, I deeply recommend you use the front end. It's where we all want to end up eventually. It's not like GitHub. Like GitHub, like you use the command line mainly. A lot of folks are like command line to GitHub. For us, I think we want to have our front end tool be far more prominent. Even if you're just using it as a web interface and you're skipping Electron because you don't want memory consumption. Rob?
Sideways feature request, it would be nice because I know the the front end app has the CLI embedded in it. If I could just like have a menu that says install CLI and it just sets up a link.
That's actually, yeah, we've had to cross that bridge a little bit with this. We're now with the update stuff that we're coming up with, and Dustin's doing a ton of work on like having a clear tip to tail build process and an end-to-end testing process. And so that's, we'll get there. I really like the way Keybase does it. We're pretty inspired by the Keybase project, but the way that if you install the Keybase front end, you actually just it just puts the CLI in your machine for you and keeps it up to date, which that's quite nice. Cool. So yeah, I think just to sort of like find our way through some of these calls. So the next call will be far more developer oriented and be like, in the sense of like, if you have a technical question about the way query works or a bug that you have any interest in participating in fixing, that's a lot of what the next call will be. And I think it would be the next one will really use that. Next week we'll sort of take that time to mainly, I think the bulk of that call will just be going through, pulling some technical concept off the shelf of how query works and like based on what others want to know about and just talk through it and understand, okay, cool. I tried to read about this, try to understand like how does query actually generate snapshots of the data set. We do some really, really serious stuff around that. And it might be fun to talk through that. Or just like starting from a higher level of like, I want to create a data set that does this. Good examples of that. We just recently shipped some fixes where you can now make data sets that are like append only, where you just take the data set version you had previously and just add 5 rows and add 5 rows, or which is like a big use case that's opened up. So in these calls, I think we're going to try and keep everything far more focused on like doing something concrete. In the other calls, it's like, how can we actually make technical improvements week over week? So if ideally, as everyone sort of like is working async, if you could take these projects that you've sort of listed here and just file an issue on query community, this is what I want to do, and sort of point to just whatever you have right now. Everybody sort of mentioned a high level goal. That'd be perfect. And ideally what we can do as those of us working on query or collaborating on the project can sort of help chuck resources on that or help point you to specific types of documentation that will help you get where you need to go. And then in 2 weeks, check in and see how that's going and see if anybody has been able to sort of like make progress on creating a data set that answers some of their questions. But in the meantime, next week, we'll have a call around improving query from a technical perspective. And that will be led far more from the like engineering side of things. But I do want to emphasize, by no means do you like need to know how to program to join the technical calls, but be prepared to be maybe a little bit bored if you don't want to get into like the nitty gritty of how something is made. So that's a bit of the trade-off, but I think it's well worth it if you want to understand how query works at a low level. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any closing thoughts, questions? I'm going to try and get everyone out a couple minutes early. Awesome. Leave a little more time. Sounds good. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. This is really appreciated. You have no idea how much it means to us to like have people show up and care about our growing little projects. Yeah, if you don't know where to file an issue, or if you have anything like half a thought, please feel free to just file away and tell us what's going on, and we'd be happy to sort of work with you to make sure we can make this project work better. Yeah, with that, I think we can kind of end early. Does that sound good? Yeah. Thanks everybody so much, and we'll see you around the internet.
Thanks, friends.
All right.
Thank you.